Well, hi, welcome back, everyone. So, the last video, well, no, actually, I uploaded a video after that of a poem. But the video I did on Renee Good, so, that unleashed, a series of comments within the comments section, and I really wanted to address that because, for one, none of the right-wingers were the rightists, were really engaging with what I wanted to engage with, so here's the problem, right? The rightist position, and not all right-wingers actually feel this way, MAGAs, it's really where it's at. There are conservatives, libertarians, and, like neoconservative stuff like that are actually in the same opinion as I am with the Renee Good situation, that was not self-defense. But that's not... The issue is that that's the debate that's been going on within the entirety of everything. Like, you go onto social media and you look this stuff up, like every left-winger is saying no, it was self-defense, or sorry, the other way around. Every left-winger is saying that was murder, and every MAGA, there are a few conservatives that do argue that it was murder as well, or many people have sort of nuanced, like, the first shot could be self-defense, second shot not so much, third shot not so much, more nuance sort of thing. But the issue is that, when rightists in the comments section say, well, I think it was self-defense, it's like, well, no shit. You think I didn't know that? That's already been established. That's across the social media sphere. Tons and tons and tons of right-wingers that have lost their ability for critical thought and healthy doses of skepticism. They all clamor to these demagogues, these people who push rhetoric and sophistry across the right-wing sphere of the internet. And it does happen on the left, too. Yes, it does. But at least the left seems to at least be more hyperbolic at times, but their foot is still in reality. Anyway, so that's already been established. It's already established. It's probably no secret. It's not pivotal. It's not groundbreaking to understand that my position is that I think it was murder. And this video, I want to go over, there's actually some new information that's come out in regards to that actually sways into the favor of the people who are claiming that it was murder. There was an independent autopsy that was done that shows that it's more than likely murder. But it's also not pivotal, and it's not mind-blowing or new information that a MAGA right-winger would make the claim that it was self-defense. That's not new information. You can find that information a dime a dozen on right-wing social media. Like pretty much any right-wing commentator that's still in the boat or the camp of MAGA will have that position. So that's been established. Nothing new is being discussed. It's like, yeah. So here's the way to look at this, to understand this, though, instead of... The other thing I want to do with this video is to illustrate the team cheerleading that's going on with the whole, like, Sierra Williams commenting about, well, the Democrats and the left and which all those are different things. Democrats are not always leftists, not always liberal. Most of them are. So most Democrats are what we call neoliberals. They're actually moderate right-wingers. They're still capitalists. They're not pushing and advocating for social welfare programs, such as socialism. They're not doing that. They're not advocating for democratic socialism. They're not advocating for social democracy even. Social democracy is the moderate left-wing side, part of the five-quadrant political compass. Objectively, though, so what's essentially going on in society is that you have a group of constituency, and they're not all leftists. Not all of them are neoliberal, not all of them are liberal, not all of them are centrist, not all of them are leftist. Some of them are rightists. They just don't go into the camp of MAGA. Because, honestly, what MAGA is doing, what Trump is doing, it violates some of the core tenets and ideas and philosophies of classical conservatism, of classical liberalism, of libertarianism, state rights, and so on and so forth, Constitution, Founding Fathers, blah, 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 blah. So to all the people who are in the camp, that you have a constituent that's saying it was murder within the United States. It's not politically divided, as C.R. Williams is claiming, the Democrats and the left. No, it's more complicated than that. That the mix of people of political philosophies who have the opinion that it's murder is far more medleyed than just the left. No, there are conservatives who have that position too, and including ICE, some other ICE members and DHS members who have spoken against it, as well as the now shooting and killing of Alex Preddy. And these are not the only ones. There's been multiple American civilians who have been shot and killed. We don't tend to hear about them because they tend to be people of color, not necessarily Hispanic either, but black, BIPOC people. There have been other white people who are American citizens who have been shot and killed by ICE and DHS. We don't hear as much about. Alex Preddy and Renee Good just happen to be the most popular stories. So you have this constituent that says it was murder, and then you have this constituency who says no, it was self-defense. Well, okay. We all saw this, essentially, potentially the same media. There were fakes that were put out there to intentionally make it look like Renee Good ran him over, like they sped up the video really, really fast to make it look like he was just... But that was altered footage. And there was another altered footage from a really shitty old school CRT camera that you can't tell what's going on. I mean, it's the pixelation destroys the image and how they work in general. So there's multiple angles that it's captured by between the phone of Johnathan Ross and two other bystanders. So this the thing. General consensus is sort of a 50-50. I don't think it's a 50-50. I think it's actually more like maybe 80-20, 60-40, maybe. But the point is that, okay, so when you run into this situation, typically in society, where this constituent says one thing and this constituent says another thing that is sort of contradictory to the other. Well, there's a thing that we usually do for that, and it's called adjudication. And that's what I'm trying to engage with. That's what's not being engaged with. Why aren't we adjudicating this? Why isn't the evidence being cross-examined? And if we're not doing that, aren't we setting up a legal precedence for law enforcement to act with impunitively. Like, they can do no wrong. They're always going to take their side, no matter what. So, in this video, I wanted to explain that. I wanted to show and sort of highlight and illustrate the team cheerleading that's going on, and in this sort of strange fallacies that the right likes to make of where they kind of take on this position where it's like, well, it's okay when they do it, but it's not okay, like, if it were done to them. But they're not even like engaging with the prospect of what I was bringing up in that video, which is it could be applied to them. That it was inevitable that it will be applied to them if we keep going down this path and advocating for this new legal precedence where we don't adjudicate, we don't use due process, where law enforcement can act with impunity. That creates a new legal standard for law enforcement officers, regardless of agency, to do whatever it is that they want to do. You know, they whether it be through negligence or whether it be through corruption, they can cause death, property damage, and even critical injury. So even negligence, you are responsible for those things. And so one of the things that I wanted to address is that there's actually some things that the Supreme Court has done due to the stacking of Donald Trump and his administration on that Supreme Court, where we may actually already be in that predicament where this new legal precedent has been set, that law enforcement officers can act with impunity, that there's very little you can do to defend yourself. And I've got receipts for that too. I wanted to talk about that. I also wanted to bring up the ICE and DHS officers that are actually saying, no, we don't like that. Like, they are saying that their fellow ICE and DHS are taking it too far and killing people. And I've got an article that shows that, and some links, all that will be in the description for many of this. And I do recommend checking those links out. So there's some legal stuff that the Supreme Court has overturned. Some of these legal decisions by the Supreme Court, by the way, date all the way back to George Washington. And so that's one of the things that's making it hard to hold law enforcement accountable for corruption, to protect citizens from corrupt law enforcement or even negligent law enforcement. That is actually a thing. There's two serious ways of holding law enforcement accountable that have been taken away from us, and there's only one left. And I'm going to show that in this video. So yeah, you also have the ICE DHS that are speaking out. You know, one of them flat out said, hey, we've got all this equipment on us, all this equipment that will easily pacify and subdue, especially in the case of Renee Good, who is not armed, without ever having to resort to lethal force. And the ICE and DHS officers themselves are bringing this up, saying, how do you skip over all that stuff and just jump directly to the gun and the use of lethal force? They're speaking out against it. This is something that a lot of people on the left are not paying attention to, is what do people in ICE and DHS think? Why aren't more because the thing that I got this from was an investigative journalist who wanted to actually talk to ICE agents and DHS agents and ask them what they think. And I think more investigative journalists should be doing that. So this is why it's really important to engage with the questions that I'm asking, is because the questions that I'm asking about what the precedent of legal standard and norm is, and should that change, it is inevitable that it will eventually impact MAGAs themselves. This isn't a case of it's okay when we do it. It's like these people, these types of dictators, these authoritarians, they always turn on their supporters. It's inevitable. Eventually, and see, this is the thing, even if you are MAGA and something happens to you, I guarantee you, and you'll find that out with the ICE and DHS interviews, because they admit there's propaganda going on, is that if the Trump administration needs you to be a leftist so that they can make you into a demon, demonize you, then they will make you out to be a leftist. And then the veil, the disillusionment will occur, and MAGAs that don't have possibly even already undergone this have probably already seen it, of like, oh, so all this stuff that they keep saying about the left isn't actually real. They're just calling anything that goes against or like just, you know, they mess with somebody, they mess their life up, they rough them up or something. And then they're like, I voted for you. You know, what are you doing, Trump? And the Trump administration goes and talks to his little press team, where that person is painted up to be a radical leftist. And that's them otherizing, that's them scapegoating, so that they can have an enemy. Because that's the chosen enemy that the Trump administration has done, is that the left is the enemy from within. That's why you can't just sit there and believe or trust that just because they're sitting up there going like, oh, they're radical leftists doing all this violence and crazy stuff to be true. There were plenty of people in Portland who were taking videos on their phones, uploading it to their social media to show that it's not the only thing making it war-torn was ICE. It was actually like really peaceful, and people felt safe. And when ICE and DHS came in, suddenly they don't feel safe anymore. Another thing that wasn't addressed. Another thing that wasn't being engaged with. When can a middle-aged disabled man be able to just go to the park without being harassed and hassled by some law enforcement agency that shouldn't even be in a city, asking for papers about citizenships and everything? It's a violation of privacy. It's a violation of privacy and peace and quiet. It's not freedom. It's like we're eroding liberties and freedoms for a false sense of safety and security, because that safety and security isn't actually there. So first, let's do the comments section. This is part 1, the intro. And I think this is going to be long. I didn't intend for this video to be like a video essay, but I find that as I shift more and more towards my true leftist self. I know I used to make anti-SJW videos back in the day because I didn't understand what that was. So the more and more I'm going, more and more like honestly, like a lot of that content that I didn't understand was I was accidentally making right-wing content. I didn't understand that. It's very low effort. You don't really need to do a lot of stuff, but the more and more I'm going in this direction, the more and more I find myself trying to be more accurate and more researched and higher quality. And as a result of that, I end up having more and more pieces of information and facts and studies and things like that I need to bring to the table, thus making the videos longer and more like a video essay. Because these things are not something that can easily be covered in 20 minutes. That's pretty low effort stuff. To just sit in front of the camera and be like, the right is dog shit. They're stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. That's lame. It's very low effort. So the more accurate, the more detailed it becomes, the more video essay-y it becomes. So I apologize about that it's long and that it's basically going to be a video essay, but I want to be accurate and I want to be as thorough as possible. So this could have been longer because I even wanted to go over the Supreme Court overrulings and read that and everything, but I've got some citations that'll just do that anyway, so we're not going to, but you are free to do that. It's not secret. You can look that up yourself. So, yeah, it's not a mystery when a MAGA tells me that they think Johnathan Ross, what he did was in self-defense. And it shouldn't be a mystery that I, as a leftist, say, well, I don't think it was in self-defense. I think it was murder. And instead of looking at it from a left-right tribalistic perspective and having values, principles that you adhere to, rather than team cheerleading, what you end up discovering is that, well, you just, it's not a left-right. It's just, there's this constituent that says it's murder, and this constituent that says it's self-defense. And I really don't understand why we're not adjudicating it. And I don't understand why the MAGAs that keep supporting this won't engage with the question about adjudication. And I can't make this clear enough. I don't know how to make this clear. I guess I have to talk very slow. I am not interested in another breakdown of the timeline of events leading up to her shooting, whether that is from a left or the perspective that it was murder, or from the perspective that it was self-defense, because that has already been discussed to death. That is the main core of that conversation that has already taken place. We cannot move the conversation forward by continuously repeating what we already know and think about each other. It's going to get us nowhere. So, yeah, I think it was murder. And you know what? I think Johnathan Ross, being that he has had a history of doing this, there's many court cases about this where the reason why it's in the protocol that they're not supposed to be in front of the vehicle is because officers would stand in front of the vehicle so that they could have a plausible deniability and shoot the person and then claim it was in self-defense. In reality, it was not. That's why the protocol exists. There are many, 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 many court cases you can look up that verify this, that is why that is the protocol. Because there were officers from many agencies that were standing in front of vehicles and shooting at the person in the driver's seat or the passenger seat and then claiming that it was in self-defense. Even though they put themselves in that position on purpose just so they could shoot and claim self-defense as a point of plausible deniability. It's a lie. That's why the protocol exists. And you can look those court cases up. There's plenty of them. And they still exist on the DOJ despite the Trump administration trying to erase tons of legal precedences from the government's website so that we can't learn or read about what actual law or legal precedences have been set. And the other thing that they don't realize is a lot of that stuff is archived in other lawyers across the United States have access. They have those in their archive, their books. But that is my... So in that situation, I see in the video Renee Good trying to drive around him. She's trying to get away from him. She's trying to get through this space, so she's doing this. That's not running someone over. That's trying to drive around someone. That's what I think happened. That's what I see. I think Johnathan Ross got pissed off that Renee Good's wife said what she said to him, and then, he switches his phone, gets his gun ready. And I think him being pissed off at what Renee's wife said is why he shot and killed Renee Good. That is my subjective opinion. It's not objective, it's subjective opinion based on the evidence available to me. And to the MAGAs that are defending the actions of Johnathan Ross, who say it's self-defense, she hit him, that is not objective either. That is your subjective opinion. So we have two competing subjective opinions. They're not necessarily right. They're not necessarily left. That needs to stop. This whole team cheerleading tribalist thing, it's seriously, it's making people's brains turn to mush. I mean, just a pure puddle of shit up here in the noggin. You need to have a base level of rationality, something that follows a rational line of thinking to a logical conclusion, a base form of principles and values. And when you do the team cheerleading shit, you can't do that. Because no matter what your side does, you have to cheer and stuff. That's why you've got MAGAs defending pedophilia now. It's that's insane. Hopefully they don't feel influenced by that. Hopefully. But, the left found out Noam Chomsky was in the Epstein files. The left is not defending Noam Chomsky. The left is saying, fuck him. What an asshole. Because you know that they're separating themselves and saying, no, I have a base level set of values and principles, and I'm not going to waver just because someone on our side broke those. No. So it's still possible, you know, that maybe, I don't know, with this autopsy, I don't, and with these ICE and DHS agents, I don't think so. But if you really truly believe that that what he did was in self-defense, this gets into epistemology. Epistemology is why you think and believe the things that you do. Do you have good reason to think and believe the things you do? I don't think it's healthy to just say, no, it's objectively true with self-defense. That's not healthy. That's not intellectually honest. Because it's not objective, it's subjective. I'm willing to admit that saying, me claiming I think it's murder, that's subjective based on the evidence that's available to me. I'm not making an objective claim. So, this is why we need to engage with the questions that I was asking, which is based on, how do we want our legal system to operate? I think it should be adjudicated. Because you have this constituent saying one thing, this group of constituents saying another thing. Well, when that happens, that should go to court, should be all the evidence should be cross-examined by jury, judge, and come to a conclusion. And guilt, proper sentencing where guilt is applicable, even based on him being ICE member, whatever that is. And of course, if innocent, fine, clear his name. And we can all shut up about it. But one thing I don't want to shut up is, one thing that bothered me about making this video was that the idea that the Renee Good story is no longer relevant. And I think that's really sad, that in the modern media age that we are in, that you can attach such a value to a person's life based on relevance. And the thing is she was a human being. She had people that loved and cared about her, regardless of what you think. The media cycle making someone's murder irrelevant, that's kind of sick. It's not kind of sick, it is sick. It's sad. She's a human being. Yeah. That should never become not relevant. It should always be relevant. Someone lost their life needlessly. So, yeah, I'm glad we get this out of the way. I hope we understand. I want to engage with these questions. Give me a second, my hand is so fucked up. Give me a minute. Fuck. Okay, so the questions are, what do we normally do in instances like this? Does non-compliance automatically rationalize lethal force? Yes, no, or adjudication? Should we want a society in where law enforcement, regardless of agency, act with impunity in the use of lethal force? Should we want a society in where law enforcement, regardless of agency, act with this impunity, to never be held to scrutiny despite possible corruption or negligence that leads to harm, property damage, and so on? Talking about these other things isn't answering those questions. Talking about Charlie Kirk and all that shit. Those are different conversations. I want to know these questions. That's how you engage honestly. That's how you engage in good faith, is engaging with these questions. And all the other stuff I already know. I know you hate the left. That's not an epiphany. If you're a rightist, it's not an epiphany that a MAGA supporter hates a leftist. That's not news. Like, really, no shit. Where was I? Despite. Okay. And if so, if they should never be held to scrutiny, if so, why? How do we hold to account law enforcement officers, regardless of agency, when they are reckless, negligent, or corrupt? And this is more irrelevant than maybe we previously thought when we were doing this in my little comment section. Because as it turns out, like I said, there is an investigative journalist that looked into this and found there's some Supreme Court stuff that the current Supreme Court overruled. Supreme Court rulings that date back to George fucking Washington. Isn't that wild? Okay. So that's it for the part 1 intro. Now we're going to go on to, should I have a slide show part 2? Part 2, which is the conversation in the comment section. Part 2, conversation, comment section. So C.R. Williams claimed on this Renee Good video that I made, his retort back was, she backed the vehicle up and drove it directly at him. She got exactly what she should have expected. And I don't think that that's what happens. I reject this claim. So, go on to say, I don't know if you watched the full video. Everyone has seen many different videos, angles, and have walked away with different conclusions, despite that we have all seen the same video. There are videos out there that have been edited to make it look like he was flat out ran over, where the video has been sped up, and other videos that have been edited to be outright propagandist and fake. I am not really interested in people's opinions on whether or not this was self-defense. It could be, it may not. It's hard to say. What questions I think are far more relevant and more important is a question of what do we normally do in instances like this? There's a specific word I am looking for, as there's a specific thing we have usually always done in instances like this. And this instance seems to be the exception for an unknown or undefined reason. The specific word I'm looking for is adjudication. Other questions that are important that carry long-term consequences for literally everyone in the entire United States are, does noncompliance automatically rationalize lethal force? Yes or no? Or adjudication. There's a third option. Should we want a society in where law enforcement, regardless of agency, act with impunity in the use of lethal force? Should we want a society in where law enforcement, regardless of agency, act with this impunity to never be held to scrutiny despite possible corruption or negligence that leads to harm, property damage, and so on? And if so, if the answer is yes, why? How do we hold to account law enforcement officers regardless of agency when they are reckless, negligent, or corrupt? depending on the answers to these questions, it could set a legal precedent in how the U.S. citizens are policed in general, and where no one wins as they act with impunity and without question, regardless of their negligence or abuse of power. This would be a society in where, due to the lack of restraint or mandates for any and all law enforcement, would create a state of forced control at an officer's discretion. This would be a violation of many constitutional rights, including right to peace and quiet, right to privacy, right to the pursuit of happiness. Why are so many willing to forego any question of conduct in this case and adjudicate the matter with fact-based evidence? Legal experts, including ballistic analysis detectives, such as those in cybergrams who are trained to analyze media, in front of a judge and a jury. If we do this the precedented way, it is possible both those on the left and right political aisle are both correct and wrong for different reasons. A ruling like this takes place all the time in looking at these kinds of cases. It could be the first shot is completely justified as self-defense after a jury and judge analyze all the relevant data. It could also be that second and third shot have different rulings in accordance with the protocol that ICE agents are supposed to be following. I really doubt you truly want a law enforcement in this country that can demand you hand over all your firearms, where their action to use lethal force on you, despite an obvious infringement of your constitutional rights, to be met with lethal force for non-compliance. There are tons of examples of this to prove that we know there are officers who are negligent or just use their power for corrupt purposes, which is why civilians can demand justice in these instances of unlawful or negligent use of their positions as a law enforcement officer. If they have absolute immunity in anything they do, they can pull you over and demand you take off your underwear. And non-compliance can be used to rationalize lethal force with no adjudication allowed for you, the victim, to pursue legal actions against a corrupt law enforcement agent. This sets a dangerous precedent where those who are corrupt can easily use their position inappropriately where there is no accountability. And this sets a dangerous precedence where those who are corrupt can easily use their position in appropriate accountability. And it should not take an incident to happen to a MAGA, right-winger, traditional conservative, or libertarian for this to be a problem. Unfortunately, it seems like for C.R. Williams that's going to be the case. And he's not interacting with what I'm saying at all, and it's actually getting really, really frustrating because he's basically just shouting right-wing talking points, like classic greatest hit responses, but not actually engaging with the questions, not engaging. He's not being an honest interlocutor. He's not he's not doing this in good faith. And what he's doing is a my team versus your team sort of political approach, which is a very, very immature way of looking at law. I'm coming at this from as neutral of a standpoint as I can. I could be doing this from a leftist standpoint, and I'm not doing that. I'm coming at it from a neutral standpoint because I'm trying to be as objective about this as possible. So, I'll talk about that a little more in a minute, if I can keep my damn place. Okay. This should not be how any civilian in the U.S. is policed, regardless of their political affiliation. Right now, it is happening to leftists, which we honestly do not know if Renee Good is an actual leftist or not. This is just assumed to me, it is vitally important that any and all civilians have the right to due process, adjudication, legal action, and to receive justice against law enforcement officers who have caused terror, harm, destruction of property, rape, assault, battery, critical injury, or even death. Whether that is due to negligence in their duties to act under protocol, which would have avoided this issue, or simply because they are corrupt and abusing their position of power. In this video, I brought up that there are many instances of this happening to both leftists and even right-wingers of many brands in the past. Ruby Ridge is an example where the state had to pay out a large sum of money for violating the rights of a white separatist, as the law enforcement agency was in abuse of their power, which resulted in the death of his entire family and deserved legal action and accountability to those who violated his rights. I also gave an example that was politically neutral, a case that happened here in KC in a suburb called Lenexa, located on the Kansas side of the greater KC metro area, and where a police officer forced a woman to walk home naked in the snow. She sued them and won, rightfully so. Proper protocol would demand the officer had arrested her and charged her with a DUI or DWI, which this officer, not following proper protocol, left him a liability to the community and to the Lenexa, Kansas law enforcement. Had he followed protocol, that woman would have served a probation sentence, common ruling for DUI or DWI, possibly serving jail time as well, which did not happen. I personally am not interested in any leftist or rightist personal opinion of guilt or innocence on either side until adjudication can occur. Adjudication will not occur for a specific reason, and that's because Trump blocked it. And this is a legal precedence that should not have been set. This will eventually affect everyone, especially when they run out of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+ people, leftists, liberals, and centrists, as well as neoliberals who are conflated to be as leftists, or any other marginalized group they wish to proceed with attacking. Once they run out, being especially that the legal system is for profit and needs criminals to make money, this could very well just become the legal standard for how they eventually just police everyone, including a country full of MAGAs. Law enforcement based on force control of ultimate conformity, consequences should be considered. And this is exactly what Sierra Williams is not interacting with for some reason. I don't know why you cannot just interact with this. I don't know why you cannot just talk about this, because the thing is what is being discussed in this comments section. You can go on YouTube, and the YouTube videos of this sort of the talking points you are expecting from me as a leftist, and the talking points, the baseless assertions you are giving to me as a rightist, are like a dime a dozen. There's millions of them. This is like the popular, like neon sign flashing predicament all across social media between the right, the left, the liberal, centrist, and etc. is what is being thrown out there. What is not being engaged with is this idea that, okay, let's say you get rid of all these people that you don't like, and then this becomes the standard in how they and that's typical of like authoritarian regimes. They eventually turn on their supporters, and this becomes the way that they just enforce law, which means they're going to start targeting the people that are championing for it. So this seems very, very short-sighted. And it's not a game. This shouldn't just be breaking down into team cheerleading, which is what's happening. You're basically saying, well, it's okay when my side does it. But what happens when your side starts doing it to itself, which is inevitable? And we have historical record to show that happens. And I don't know why this isn't being engaged with. Do you want to live in a country where that's the legal precedent, where there's no accountability to law enforcement? You can't hold them accountable. And then he went on to say, what are your thoughts on this? Do you want a system like this for yourself? That is the important question many people seem to not be asking themselves for some reason. And so then he says, seen it from multiple angles. Okay, that doesn't address anything I said. I don't care that you've seen it from multiple angles. I just said I am not interested in any leftist or rightist opinion or view on whether or not guilt or innocence should be presumed. It does appear to be a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense. Well, that's your opinion. I don't think it is. I reject this, and you need to demonstrate this to be true. And I'm trying to demonstrate my position that it wasn't self-defense to be true, but ultimately how we do that in a system is that it's to be adjudicated, where all evidence is cross-examined, which we don't have the capability of doing because we don't have access to all the evidence. Her driving the vehicle in the direction of the ICE agent to which she knew to be an ICE agent constitutes deadly force regardless of whether she was understood that or not. Again, this does not address anything that I said. This is just talking. This is like me saying, like, what kind of legal system do you want? And then he's saying, I saw a video where someone was shot and killed and I agree with it. Okay, what kind of legal system do you want? That doesn't answer the question. This is dodging. This is a misdirection. It's still not engaging with the actual. This is not honest in being an honest engager. It's not. This is very dishonest. It's anti-intellectual too. Furthermore, the Minnesota and Minneapolis authorities brought these raids upon themselves when they chose to give aid to people here illegally. Again, this is something that I'm not interested in. I'm not talking about why the ICE agents are there. I've not brought that up at all. Why are you bringing this up? Like this is, again, this is like saying, like, hey, these flowers are really pretty, and you're like, my dog has spots. Oh, okay, cool. We're not talking about that. I have no idea what that has to do with anything. It wasn't a secret that the administration campaigned on deporting people who are here legally. This is a completely different conversation. We're not having this conversation. And I'm not going to engage with this conversation because I still need answers to the question. And as I pointed out, that doesn't answer any of my questions. He says it does, though. Really, this answers my questions on the legal precedent in how we do due process in this country to hold law enforcement accountable. So, because he's seen the video from multiple angles. That answers those questions. And in his opinion, it's pretty clear that it was self-defense. That answers the question on how we handle adjudication and due process and holding law enforcement accountable. That answers that question. Or talking about why ICE is even there. That answers that question. No, it doesn't. She was shot because she presented as a deadly threat. Again, this is a blanket assertion. And there are many, many people who disagree with this. And there are many, many people who do agree with it. And that's already been established. Like I said, the videos that establish this between the right and the left are a dime a dozen. I'm not interested in that conversation. That conversation's been had. I'm not interested in it. You really can't evoke Ashley Babbitt as your side cheered at the non-guilty verdict issued. The precedent is already set. So, on this one, there is the case that if we say non-compliance, and there's no nuance to non-compliance at all, should never result in the use of lethal force, then yes, there should be justice for Ashley Babbitt. And I will completely concede that. But so far as it is to say, the predicament around Ashley Babbitt was a very different one. This was a crowd of people who were talking about wanting to kill elected officials. It's a very different situation entirely. But I would concede that Ashley Babbitt should receive justice and the officer who shot her should go to jail if we as a society say that non-compliance is never a reason to use lethal force. Then fine. Arrest the officer who shot her, and I'll stand behind it. You want to talk about a society where people kill opposition? No. Nowhere in my video, nowhere in any of these comments did I ever say anything close to that at all. Well, your side already showed just how they really think after attempted assassination of Trump. The left did not do an attempted assassination of Trump. There were 2 attempted assassinations of Trump, and both of them were right-wing people. The killing of a number of political... And again, this has nothing to do with the topic. This is just often left field of hey, I think you have really nice wallpaper. And then, start talking about well, the chimps in the Amazon do something. It's like, well, this has nothing to do with wallpaper. I don't know why you're bringing this up. The killing of a number of political opponents. The left hasn't killed a number of political opponents. The side that has been more violently active has been the right wing, and that's even indicated in the data, which Kristi Noem tried to cover up because the data does not reflect that the left is more violent than the right. There have actually been Democratic publicly elected officials who have been assassinated by right-wing MAGA pundits. There have been no assassinations of right-wing publicly elected officials by leftists. The assassination of Charlie Kirk. Okay, well, according to Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, and Kash Patel, your set up legal people where the system is completely stacked in your favor do not consider the person who assassinated Charlie Kirk to be a leftist. His official title, according to them, according to Kash Patel, according to Pam Bondi, according to Kristi Noem, is that he is an apolitical nihilist extremist. That's his title. That's not a leftist. In each case, many on the left cheered on, or in the case of the miss on Donald Trump, lamented the failure to kill him. I won't argue against that, that is true. But I will say this isn't engaging with the topic of, do we want a system where law enforcement officers can act with impunity? That's what I'm interested in. And this does not interact with that. Furthermore, the Democrats at various levels, this is just like a big poo-poo party on Democrats and leftists. That's all this is. Furthermore, the Democrats and various levels of government use their position to target political opposition. Like what? In the case of people like Kyle Rittenhouse, who was found not guilty, by the way, many still want his head despite the amounts of video evidence showing he met the duty to retreat standard of self-defense. I said it was in self-defense when that happened, which is not a popular position for a leftist. But I don't see any leftists still talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, barely mentioned from time to time. Most people have moved on from that. But again, it's not addressing the issue. I'm not interested in this is a completely different conversation that I'm not interested in having. You want to ask questions on precedent, you need to start asking those very questions to some of the leftists. You can ask those questions to some of the leftists. I don't see what the point in doing that is. In any case, what I am seeing from the left is a massive, it's okay when we do it, and you simply have to die so we can get our way. I don't see citations of that at all. And again, this is still not engaging with the topic at hand. He said, to further add to this, Democrats and left have been encouraging people to violently agitate and then cry when they finally get the reaction they were pushing for. Again, this is a straw man fallacy. This is a fake, cartoonish representation of what the left actually stands for, what their position actually is. This sounds like somebody who has just sat and consumed nothing but right-wing media to the point where they don't even know what the left is saying anymore. And no. I don't even know what he's talking about. And I don't want to know because I'm sure it's mired in falsehoods that would take 5 billion years to unwrap the gish gallop that would come from that. And again, it's not engaging honestly. Where have you seen this? I've not been... What leftist is encouraging that we should have, violently go around killing right-wing people? I don't know any leftist that's doing that. Maybe tankies, but they're the American Communist Party has only got 250,000 people in it. It's so tiny. If it ever threatened anybody, it would be adorable. Over the last couple of weeks, a number of them have been actively interfering with arrests going beyond the threshold of peaceful protest. No, well, maybe some, but what they're going against is unlawful arrests. What do you do when there's unlawful arrests? Because I don't know that there's anything that will convince you that they are unlawful. I think you're told that they're unlawful. And it's just kind of a trust me, bro kind of vibe. And you're not demanding that there be evidence given that that's what it is. You've thrown critical thinking out the window. You've thrown sound epistemology out of the window. And logic and reason, that's gone out the window. Healthy dose of skepticism has gone out the window as well. It's just This is just an assertion. It's just an assertion. That's it. I am pretty well convinced at this point the left Democrats don't care about authoritarianism. They want their brand of authoritarianism. Some, maybe. I don't know. The left is pretty nebulous. So, and you also have liberals in there, centrists, and neoliberals in there that have a different agenda than what the left, which democratic socialists, anarchists, and communists would want. The only one that isn't really, really extreme in that case would be the democratic socialists that are advocating for mixed economy, which every other Western nation does except for the United States. And you're welcome to disagree with having a mixed economy of socialism and free market capitalism if you want. That's perfectly fine, but that's what a lot of leftists are trying to do. So then again, I'm pointing out as I've been going through this, I guess you're not wanting to engage with the actual questions about adjudication or what the standard norm of practice of law is, or the mere ability to hold accountable an officer who may or may not have been neglective in their duty or abuse of power. Got it. And that's the thing, is I'm trying to keep him on track. Let's stick with what I'm actually engaging with, because all this other stuff is different conversations, it's pivoting, it's false equivalencies, it's red herrings, it's a bunch of fallacies. This is sophistry and rhetoric. And it's basically designed to just be a big dump, just poop throwing at the left and Democrats without having an actual engaged conversation. I mean, literally, every single thing that he's saying here is a dime a dozen on the right wing. You go to right wing media, which is something I do keep my eye on. I don't live in an echo chamber. I don't live in a bubble. I actually do engage with right wing content because I want to know what they say. I want to know what's actually being said by them. And these are talking points. These are little assertions, little talking points that pretty much every single right-wing social media commentator just spews out continuously. And what's interesting is when they do this, they don't have any way to represent that this is what is actually being said, or that the left is being represented by right-wing political pundits who are engaging in demagoguery on the internet. That is what the left's actual position is, and most of the time it's not, which is what you see a lot of the times when right-wing MAGAs actually try to engage in an honest debate with a leftist, is that they find out pretty quickly that what they think, the cartoon version of what they think the left wants, what the left stands for, what the left represents, is not actually the case, that it is actually a cartoon straw man version of what the left actually says, what we actually argue, what we actually think. It's very interesting. And what I find more interesting on the right wing is you will have the right wing saying, this part of the Constitution is really, really important, and until Trump breaks it. And then suddenly it's not important, or there's an excuse for it. Well, it's okay in this instance because X. What's really interesting now, and I would love to see someone defend this, is now that Trump's name is all over the Epstein files, and this is off topic, it is. You don't have to engage with it because it's off topic. But one of the things that I find interesting is that now people who make it their career on social media to go out of their way to try to debate right-wing people, particularly MAGA, which you can do on the line, Jimmy Snow the line, and then just the line where you have atheists and skeptics, and they will debate MAGAs or conservatives on political issues. And you have people like Dean Withers, and which I don't think Dean Withers is as strong as those at the line. I think they're more professional and more educated in logic, critical thinking, epistemology, and philosophy than Dean Withers. But Dean Withers ran into a MAGA who tried to defend Trump's position being in the Epstein files by making the argument that having sex with children was okay by asking Dean Withers, what's wrong with having sex with children? So in the build-up to this election, it was like, oh boy, oh goody, we're going to release the Epstein files and we're going to lock up all these pedophiles. And then when Trump's name's on it, suddenly they're not pedophiles anymore, they're hebephiles. And now you have MAGAs that are outright just defending having sex with children. Interesting how the goalpost just keeps moving. It's like you don't have any values. You don't have any fixed ideas, which this video will talk about, is an interesting thing that is occurring on the right that is indicative of people in a cult. And it goes back to the video that I made about the Groypers and talking about the origins of the word demagogue, little god. It makes sense that why you're in a cult is that these people who engage in sophistry and rhetoric, they're not trying to make logically sound arguments or epistemologically sound arguments. The goal is to be charismatic and manipulative as possible, and manipulation is inherently a fallacy. That's what makes a fallacy. A fallacy is that it is inherently manipulative. Appeal to a motive force, appeal to authority, because someone said so. Bad epistemology. But the goal with these people who engage in sophistry and rhetoric is to it's not to make deductively sound arguments. It's to pander to people's fears. It's to pander to their superstitions, to their biases, and get them riled up because they essentially are trying to amass power, and they've been presenting problems for democracies since 400 BCE. And it's something that even the original philosophers noticed back in ancient Greece. He says, I am engaging with a particular case with Renee Good. Really? So let's go back up here where we're talking about the Democrats have been encouraging people to violently agitate, then cry when they finally get the reaction they were pushing for. Oh, and then the ICE people being in the city, and Democrats and the left are stupid, and they don't care about authoritarianism, and they just want their own authoritarianism. What does that have to do with Renee Good? Because this sounds like you're trying to build a case that makes the entire camp of the left sound like a giant puddle of poop. And I don't even know if Renee Good is leftist, is she? Has that been discussed? I don't know if she is. She doesn't have to be a leftist to not like what ICE is doing. There are plenty of conservatives that do not agree with what ICE is doing, including ICE agents themselves, which I'm going to go over in this eventually. The line was driving the vehicle and ultimately hitting the agent. She didn't hit the agent. If you watch the video, she's actually steering the car away from trying to essentially drive around him. What the agent was actually doing, and he's been guilty of doing it before, he has a history of doing it, is putting himself in front of the vehicle on purpose so that he can shoot at her and claim that it was in self-defense. That is a deadly force, which is deadly force is an unacceptable response. That is deadly force, to which deadly force is an unacceptable. Okay, I read that wrong. Is an unacceptable. I would agree. Deadly force is an unacceptable. Right. That is deadly force, which deadly force isn't acceptable. Yes. If you need to defend yourself because somebody is going to kill you, then yes, using deadly force to defend yourself is acceptable. I agree. But I don't think that this is what happened. That's not my understanding of the situation. That's your understanding of the situation, and pretty much every right-wing person, like most right-wing people that I've talked to. There are some that don't actually agree with that. But this is why I think it should be adjudicated. This is exactly why it should be adjudicated, is you are displaying in real time my argument as to why it should be adjudicated, because I don't think it was in self-defense, and you do. That's why it should be adjudicated. So why is that not being engaged with? Because we both now understand, we've looked at the video. If we're not going to play political cheerleading and being tribalistic, and we're going to look at this objectively and use sound epistemology, use good reasoning and logical skills. Okay, I watched the video. I think Renee is trying to drive around him and get away from him. Okay, you're saying, he's saying, C.R. Williams is saying, and many rightists are saying that it was self-defense. Okay, we watched the same video and we're walking away with different conclusions. That's the topic I'm trying to engage with, since we are seeing the exact same video, and for some reason we are walking away with different positions. The thing that you do about that is you use our legal system, our legal process, to adjudicate. And that's my question. Why aren't we doing that? Why would you be against that? And then he says, what abuse of power? She and her wife were actively interfering with a federal law enforcement operation by recklessly driving in front of them for some time. No, she was parked on the side of the road on a one-way that had 2 lanes. This is bad faith, because this is just being dishonest. Finally, they had enough, and actually, ICE agents, they're what's the phrase I'm looking for? Their jurisdiction begins and ends with illegal immigrants. They actually have no jurisdiction whatsoever, according to the Department of Justice on their own webpage itself. They have no jurisdiction over citizens whatsoever. They're not even allowed to talk to us, really. That you can go read that on the DOJ website. Then it's still there, even under the Trump administration, who has deleted many things to try to hide laws from the public for some reason. That's an interesting thing, but we're not going to get on that either. To that point, she drove her vehicle at a federal law enforcement. There is no question on whether or not they knew they were being detained by federal agents, or whether the detention was lawful or not. This is completely obfuscating, again, the point. She drove her vehicle at a federal law enforcement agent. I don't think she did. That's not what I see in the video. I think she's trying to get away from him. There is no question. There is a question. That's why we're having this conversation, and that's why this debate is all over social media, on whether or not they knew they were being detained. ICE cannot detain citizens by federal agents, or whether the detention was lawful or not. And this exact thing, whether the detention was lawful or not, goes right back to what I'm trying to engage with, which is about law enforcement regardless of agency, abusing their power. Because if it's not lawful, what do you do? That's the point. That's why I want to engage with the question. What is irresponsible is the continued engagement of the very reckless behavior that leads to potentially fatal consequences. Well, the fellow ICE agents and DHS agents do not agree with this, to be honest with you, and I will go over that soon. This is Lafayette, and I had a conversation with him, but I'm just kind of... Because okay, so... He says, you are assigned to conduct arrests on illegal immigrants. Some bozos are driving their vehicle in front of yours constantly in an attempt to illegally stop you from doing your job. No, she actually waved several ICE trucks on to pass her because it was a dual lane, one-way street, which this has been looked up, Google mapped, looked at it on the street view. It is a one-way with 2 lanes, where there is a sideline for parking. And that is where Renee Good and her wife was on the sideline for the parking. Your fellow agent attempts to detain them, and they drive their vehicle into you. What do you do? And this is assuming that you are correct. This is an assumption. That's fallacious, and it's engaging dishonestly. My response, move out of the way. Oh, what then? Nothing. If Johnathan Ross just stepped 1 foot back, just 1 step back, and let Renee drive off, then Renee would still be alive and nothing would happen. It would be fine. By the way, she hit him before he had a chance to move. No, she didn't. I don't see that in the video. I don't see this. This. We don't need to read that. Okay. This is a really long rant about me leading up to this video and talking about how Homeland Security and ICE agents are actually coming forward and saying that they do not think Johnathan Ross should have shot Renee Good. That they are actually getting really worried about this. And I have an article on that and stuff. So, So I'm wondering if he's saying that this is my take on Renee Good shooting. Whoever told you things like the procedure is you are not allowed to stand in front of the vehicle and thus murder is wrong. Why is it wrong? This is an assertion. And again, it's still not engaging with the actual questions that I'm most interested in. And yes, that actually there are legal cases where the reason why the Department of Justice for all law enforcement agencies say that you are not supposed to approach a car from the front, because of things of what happened with Johnathan Ross, because what they found is there are many cases of officers of various different agencies were putting themselves in front of a vehicle for plausible deniability so that they can claim that they shot the person in self-defense, even though it wasn't. That's why that policy, that procedure is there. And maybe it is a write-up and not a violation or murder charges, unless he did it on purpose so that he could claim it was self-defense. And again, this goes back to the very questions I'm trying to get people to engage with that are not being engaged with at all. In good faith and honesty and being an adult and actually talking about it is adjudication. As I pointed out somewhere in this to him, is that if he really truly thinks, if you're a right-winger, you don't have to be C.R. Williams. If you're a right-winger and you think Johnathan Ross is innocent, why are you so scared, or why are you doing this temper tantrum or avoiding the issue altogether about having him go to court and proving it and having this adjudicated? Because if they adjudicate it, they cross-examine all of the available evidence, and they find that Johnathan Ross is not guilty, and that's what you think the verdict is, which there could be cooperation for both the federal government to investigate it independently, as well as the state to investigate it independently. Why this knee-jerk reaction to just go, the left is poo-poo, and not even engage with the idea of saying, well, I think you're right, we should adjudicate it because clearly we do see different things. Maybe it should be cross-examined. Or is it that you don't want it to go to court because you know he's guilty? And this is just political team cheerleading. You know, what is it? What is the reason here? What's going on? Why would we not want to adjudicate it? Why? And why won't you engage with that question? I don't know if Johnathan Ross is guilty or innocent. In my opinion, which is subjective, I don't think he is. I think he got pissed off because of what Renee's wife said to him. I think it pissed him off. And I think that's why he used his little tactic of trying to stand in front of the vehicle so he could shoot her, to have plausible deniability, and claim that it was self-defense, and hope that majority of public don't know that that's a strategy, a tactic that officers from many different agencies have used before, and why that is in their protocol not to do that. It also puts other people in danger, because if you shoot the driver, the car continues to propel. That is my subjective position. It's very clear that the rightist, not all rightists, but in this situation, the rightists here in the comment section, their subjective opinion is that it's self-defense. Okay, let's adjudicate it. This one is part 3. We're going to talk about the political team cheerleading. So while editing this, I noticed that I do a lot of this, and I apologize for that. It's really irritating, and I wish I didn't do it. It just seems to be kind of a tick thing that I do. So you notice in this, I'm presenting very calm. I would like to try to get rid of the notion, like if we take this idea of the left and right, get rid of these political affiliations and start looking at it through the lens of there's a certain population of people, regardless of what their political philosophy is, that thinks the situation with Renee Good was unlawful, that was murder. Then you have another group or constituent, and they have the position, regardless of their political affiliation, that it was self-defense. So one of the issues that we seem to be running in here is this tagline of tagging the person's position on the situation to that of their political leanings, which is not always, it does not always indicate what their position is on things. One of the reasons I'm being so calm about it is because I don't take these attacks on the left and Democrats personal. I don't find it productive, and there is a big issue with doing this. This is a video by Veritas, and he illustrates why this can be very problematic, and how you end up in logical fallacies or bad forms of thinking in doing this. Because it ends up misrepresenting people in many, many different ways. As not everyone who carries the position that it was murder is leftist. And while most people, the overwhelming amount of people who say that it was self-defense are right-wing, there's probably more of a reason why that is, because they don't seem to be operating with logic and critical thinking, which a lot of this sort of propaganda milling is something that the right wing is particularly engaging in. So, like, here at the first part of this video of Veritas, he kind of introduces this idea of political teams.
Djurgården from the east, and I grew up north of Stockholm, so naturally AIK became my team. And like most sports fans, I support this team year after year, even though all the players, all the coaches, essentially everything about the team is constantly changing. There is no fixed essence that binds me to the team. It's just my chosen tribe.
I can't explain how freeing it is to detach yourself from this absurd, only my team is ever right mentality, and how eye-opening it is when you can actually look at things objectively and pragmatically, rather than emotionally or tribally. Whenever I call something out that I see as unjust, illegal, harmful, or problematic, every single time, without fail, assuming we ignore all the ones that immediately tell me to shut my lib cuck mouth, I'm confronted with the same response every time. A response that, on its face, appears to be setting up one particular argument.
So, at the get-go, from where we are now, within the first 53 seconds, Veritas already shows one of the fallacies you end up running into is the assumption that, oh, well, you carry this position, you must be a lib cuck. But that isn't always the case. It's making the assumption that because you carry position X, then you must be position Y, which carries with it an entire idea behind it. It's more like a, what do you call it? A set. Like, position Y is a set. And there may be overlap, but somebody may not be position Y with a complete set of position Y just because they have supports position X. They can be set Y, B, A, all kinds of stuff.
One that looks fair, valid, and reasonable, but in reality, it becomes quite evident rather quickly that their argument is actually something entirely different. something much more absurd, childish, and hypocritical. It's the old classic, "Oh yeah, I didn't see you complaining when your side was doing this other identical bad thing." Let's take a look at a real-world concrete example. My tweet from earlier related to burning the American flag. Now, first of all, it needs to be said that there's actually an interesting discussion to be had here. A million reasonable questions that could be asked in response to my post. Now, naturally, very few people, especially on Twitter, are interested in that kind of conversation. What the majority of them are interested in doing is responding in a, "Oh yeah, what about you?" kind of way. The response that to some seems like a big-time gotcha, but actually has a number of major fundamental flaws. In the case of the flag burning stuff, there was one ubiquitous talking point that I still see being parroted every day. A blatantly obvious textbook false comparison. Some people really seem to hate nuance, and they apparently don't have any time or patience for the details. Sometimes I wonder if they're scared because, rumor has it, that's where the devil is. And you know how they feel about him.
In the mighty name of Jesus Christ!
In order to properly understand the distinction I alluded to before, there's two different kinds of arguments that take the general form of, you think X is bad? Well, what about when your side did Y? The two versions of this single argument are superficially identical, but at their core, they're fundamentally different. To explain, first allow me to break down the logic behind my post, which I'm going to argue is actually the quote-unquote good version of this argument, before I show a few examples demonstrating the bad. The United States was born out of resistance to what our founding fathers viewed as governmental tyranny and oppression, especially as it relates to their freedom to express discontent with that government. This right, among many others, was codified in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which clearly and explicitly protects the citizenry from governmental regulation over their speech, especially when that speech is political in nature, and doubly especially when it's critical of the government itself. There's considerable legal precedent in support of the idea that this freedom isn't limited merely to spoken words, but also extends to things like the freedom of the press to be able to publish unmolested by governmental influence, citizens assembling to peacefully protest, and even symbolic acts and gestures that we might find disrespectful or distasteful, such as giving a police officer the middle finger and yelling, "Fuck the police." This right is foundational to our liberty, and as such, there are very few exceptions in very limited circumstances. Now, there also happens to be considerable, well-established legal precedent supporting the idea that the act of burning the American flag is not one of those exceptions. In fact, it is precisely the kind of expression the First Amendment was written specifically to.
So then the next thing we get into is we start talking about burning of the American flag being an aspect of free speech. And in this, he goes into an example of how the right wing, a lot of people on the right, tend to have this sort of knee-jerk reaction where they don't consider the burning of the flag to be some sort of accepted version of free speech, presumably because the symbology behind it is something that they rather don't like. And then he brings an example of how the people who are claiming this will show an example of people who, in their opinion, not in their opinion, they present this position that their free speech is being infringed upon because they want to try to burn gay flags, which there is nothing illegal about burning an LGBTQ flag. Nothing illegal about that. What they fail to see within the article is that the people were not arrested for simply burning an LGBTQ flag or multiple LGBTQ flags. That's not why they were arrested. They if they went and bought their own LGBTQ flag and burned it, that's completely fine. That's acceptable. That's freedom of speech. What happened is they got in trouble for destruction of private property because they stole those flags from someone that the flags actually belonged to. There was nothing around free speech about this. It had to do with the destruction of property. And so, therefore, it gets misrepresented by right-wing people in this framework that their right to free speech is being infringed upon, that they're literally being arrested for exercising their freedom of speech, because they're framing it that they're not being allowed to burn an LGBTQ flag. Problem is, that's not the issue. It's the issue is that they're destroying someone else's property of which those flags belonged to. They stole. They destroyed property. And that is something that is illegal. Now, if those LGBTQ flags belonged to them and they wanted to burn them as a symbolic expression of their dislike for the LGBTQ community, that is completely legal. So this is what happens as a result of this sort of team playing, is you end up creating straw man versions of arguments, of your opposition's argument, where even like in instances of where on your side people do something that you agree with, then misrepresenting what's actually happening and saying, well, this is a violation of our free speech. But in all actuality, it's not about speech at all. It's about theft and property destruction, specifically targeted towards a marginalized group, which is what defines as a hate crime.
And even if someone actually said or did something that actually did lead to riots, that also doesn't make it incitement. I know this is hard for some people to grasp, but really all it usually takes to either get someone to understand, or for their brain to break entirely, is to turn the question back onto them. Imagine if something that you said, like, I don't know, for example, marriage is only between a man and a woman, suddenly made all the snowflake libs go nuts and start rioting. You obviously recognize how fucking absurd and unconstitutional it would be for the government to then punish you and charge you with incitement. It's insane to me how few people actually seem to consider how the shit they're advocating for could, under very different circumstances, be used against them. For whatever reason, when they look at some unilateral application of an idea that just so happens to be beneficial for them now, they can't see the obvious inevitable rod they're placing on their own backs. The government can do whatever the fuck it wants, just as long as it's good for me. What could go wrong? Now, every now and then, we get a glimpse into the mind of somebody.
He also brings up at some point in the video that the government can do no wrong as long as it's doing what it wants for me. And then, what could go wrong? Which is the very point of the questions, why I'm bringing up the questions in the initial video is because if this creates the standard of how we are policed in the United States, then I pointed this out in the original video too, is that maybe it's funny and cute and you like it when it's happening to people you don't like. But once this becomes the standard of how even you are treated by law enforcement officers, regardless of agency, it no longer becomes that, and it's not functioning in the way that you like. Now what you like is being turned against you and used against you. This is why it's good to have a foundation of values and principles rather than ever shifting ones based on your team.
Who's dangerously close to figuring that out.
Let's say we get a complete tyrant in office, and let's say Turning Point USA is having a huge protest against, something really bad that we don't like, and let's say he's a president is saying that it's getting violent. How can we? What is the difference between what you're doing and how can we prevent someone from abusing that power?
We cannot be afraid to do something because the left might do it in the future. The left is already going to do it regardless of whether we do it. That is the takeaway of the last 40 years.
This dude asked a great question. He pointed to something he very clearly felt to some extent concerned about, which I believe he was referring to the Trump administration effectively sending the military into Democrat cities, even though those cities' mayors specifically said they did not want it. I think both of them understand how problematic of a precedent this is, and yet all it took was for JD to say something vaguely resembling, I don't know, something strong and patriotic, and it gets a loud round of applause. Don't you find it interesting, though, that Vance's response was to basically say, well, they're going to do it, so we shouldn't be afraid to do it also. Remember that for later. Also, I might be crazy, but this guy kind of gives me troll vibes. Like, I'm wondering if he's a liberal content creator or something. Between the goofy facial expressions and his salute, and the fact that he asked a, like, coherent and self-aware question, makes me feel like maybe he isn't actually MAGA, but I might be imagining things. Who knows? Now, in attempting to shed light on my observation that the folks who were the loudest voices in the room claiming to respect our founding principles were perplexingly weaponizing their ignorance in justification of what would be, in any other context, the antithesis of American principles, governmental control over political speech, the response I got just basically, like, proved my point. Once again, it's like my Flat Earth video. That video was all about how Flat Earthers claim to do research, but never actually even take the most basic steps to even begin to research anything, which is made obvious when they constantly cite sources that disagree with them and call everybody else sheep when all they do is blindly parrot the same handful of long debunked talking points from their cult leaders. And naturally, one of the first comments I got when the video came out was,
"Weird. No clips of Witsit, Jaren, or Bob, three of the most prolific contributors to this conversation. It's almost as if this entire video is one huge straw man fallacy. Yes, some flat earthers don't articulate their thoughts very well and make highly speculative statements. But there are others who know the scientific literature very well and can see major flaws and even outright deception in it. If FE is so dumb, why make an 8-hour hit piece against it that leaves out the brightest people in the movement?"
Now, what's so incredible to me is that the chapter that I titled, "They Are Intellectually Dishonest," came directly after a full chapter on Bob and immediately before a full chapter about Austin Whitsitt. You just can't make this shit up. There's a fascinating tendency for people to respond to my comments, disagreeing with what I said, while simultaneously demonstrating my original point. Outside of countless misunderstandings about what incitement in the legal sense actually means, a common rebuttal to my post was people directly linking to, or loosely referring to, this and other similar stories, where a group of young men from Atlanta were arrested for tearing up pride flags. Now, you might think they're basically giving me a taste of my own medicine, right? Pointing out my hypocrisy? Well, the problem with this is actually fourfold. Now, for starters, thinking that this story is remotely a First Amendment issue by itself shows that they don't really get it. In what many of you will recognize as that famous flat earther tactic, they provide a source that they clearly did not read or understand. Because if they did, they'd recognize pretty quickly that it doesn't actually say what they think it says. If they read it, they would have known that they were charged with obstruction, criminal damage to property, conspiracy, and prowling. It's weird. None of that sounds like speech, does it? Where are the charges for hate speech or incitement? And it's also not true to classify burning the American flag, or frankly any flag at all, by itself as a quote-unquote hate crime. These folks fail to recognize that there isn't a thing that is by itself in a vacuum a hate crime. Someone does a hate crime when they first do like some other normal kind of crime, with the important distinction being that crime had to be specifically motivated by something specific about the victim that falls into the category of protected characteristics. On the front end, the thing that makes a normal crime like assault a hate crime is when the motive for that crime was directly linked to the victim's race, sexual orientation, religion, etc. And on the back end, the primary difference between a normal crime and a hate crime is that crimes that are motivated by hate receive a harsher penalty, for reasons I hope I don't have to explain. What we have in this case, the case that I've seen dozens of people so confidently throw out there as some kind of trump card, pun absolutely intended, is a case where some young guys recorded themselves taking somebody else's property without their permission, motivated by hatred towards a specific group of people based on one of those aforementioned protected characteristics, destroyed the property that they stole, fled from the police, and when some of them were caught, presumably didn't cooperate with the police to name the ones that weren't. Under any other circumstances, I would expect my right-wing friends to be talking about these inner-city urban gangbanger thugs wreaking havoc on the streets, a menace to society and a danger to the fine men and women in blue that are out there keeping us safe. But because it's, probably mostly white kids, and because the property they stole and destroyed happened to be a pride flag, it's of course much different, right? And of course, this example, in their mind, demonstrates a kind of inconsistent justice and hypocrisy. Now, interestingly enough, you might think that even if what they were saying was actually true, and it's not, that these people were arrested and charged merely for their speech, that what their argument would actually be is that any kind of government control over our speech like this is wrong in both cases, right? Well, naturally, this is where the entirety of their position comes crumbling down, exposing the fundamental distinction between our seemingly identical arguments. If what they claimed about this story was true, if it was like some kids in their backyard making TikToks of them cutting up or burning pride flags they bought on Amazon or something and then got arrested for it, I would be the first to say that them being arrested in that case would be wrong too. And of course, that's the entire point of this long-winded anecdote, isn't it? My principles are consistent. My worldview is coherent. Unchaining myself from the fucking shackles of partisan politics, the ultimate team sport, the ultimate tribal groupthink, I've got zero emotional attachment or personal investment in one side being right and the other side being wrong. My identity isn't tied to one team or the other, which not only makes it really easy for me to remain consistent in my principles, but it's also how I guess I end up being an enemy to both teams. When you begin with core principles and judge everything on a case-by-case basis through that lens, you might still be wrong, and that's okay, because that's far better than being inconsistent or hypocritical. Way too many people say that's what they're doing, but it becomes immediately clear that they're either lying to you or lying to themselves when the rubber hits the road. This individual, who I have to assume is on the left, jumps into the middle of a back and forth I was having with somebody else, seemingly taking my side while debating the other guy. The problem here is they're both wrong. He attempts to argue that there's some kind of legal distinction that makes something that otherwise isn't criminal, burning a piece of fabric that you legally own in a legal manner, suddenly into a crime specifically because it's one particular pattern of colors versus another. This is, of course, nonsensical. And lo and behold, it's trivial for me to point out what is the obvious inconsistency and actually, stand on principle, evenly applying it even to the people I might not like or agree with. All you have to do to see where your worldview starts to crumble is turn these simple claims into fucking Mad Libs. Remove all the nouns and start substituting different ones in their place in all kinds of new and exciting combinations. There's only one reason to burn the flag, and that's because you hate Therefore, burning the flag should be illegal. When you find yourself making precisely the same fundamental argument as the people you disagree with, you might want to take another look at your position. Now, at face value, both of us are pointing at the other and saying, look at this thing. They're okay with it, but not okay with this other conceptually identical thing. And that demonstrates that they're being a hypocrite. The important distinction that separates my way of approaching these things and the all too common way is not that they deny it, but instead they actually admit to it and attempt to justify it by trying to say we're both doing the same thing. You know, like that thing that J.D. Vance just did like 5 minutes ago. The trouble is, it should be clear to anyone paying attention that the comparison is just transparently flawed. These people basically admit that they're fine with somebody being jailed for burning an American flag. Full stop. The flag isn't stolen, they're not setting fire to it inside fucking town hall or something in violation of fire code, but it's merely the symbolic gesture itself that they have a problem with. And then at the same time, they think that pointing to cases where theft or vandalism or obstruction were involved, or often cases where a non-governmental social media platform bans people for saying shit they don't want on their platform, and they think that not only are those examples even remotely comparable to what they're trying to justify, but wrongfully assume that I'd be okay with their imagined scenarios if they were actually real. In trying to put me in a convenient little straw man box, attempting to point out what they think is my hypocrisy, what they're actually doing is reinforcing that old adage of every accusation is a confession. Their entire starting position is ultimately a charade, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Precisely the original point I made at the very beginning, that these folks who fancy themselves patriots are all too often just role-playing. And all you need to do is humor them for just long enough for them to really make their position clear. They simply aren't doing the same thing as me, condemning a bad thing while pointing out hypocrisy. What they're actually doing is attempting to justify the thing they've secretly believed all along, invent a straw man as equally as incoherent as theirs is, and then unironically argue that two wrongs do actually make a right. When you push back against the people who pretend that they're the real patriots who love the Constitution and have the utmost respect and reverence for the principles that this country was founded on, it doesn't take long for their facade to crumble entirely.
Also, it doesn't matter if you say that the true essence is not change, but instead, for example, big versus small government, or equality versus hierarchy, or collectivism versus freedom. Any proposed essence falls apart under scrutiny. Research has also shown in experiments that people's views on issues do not cluster to the current left-right spectrum until after they're socialized into the left-right way of thinking.
None of us fit perfectly into any of these stupid fucking boxes. None of us. When we have this us versus them mentality, we find we have to twist our logic and our principles into knots to make it all fit. Don't you think the world would be a better place if we didn't all try so hard to live up to some idealization of a label that pits you against millions of people that you realistically share so much more in common with than you might think, while simultaneously saddling you with all the burdens and baggage that come along with forcing yourself to be associated with millions of others who very likely think or act quite differently than you do? Regardless of how prominent this issue may or may not be on one side or the other, that doesn't matter. This isn't a right versus left thing. It's not a my team is better than your team thing. What this is, and I want to make this crystal clear and unambiguous, is a non-violent battle fought inside ballot boxes within the court of public opinion and inside courts of law between us, both you, yes, you, my friends in all shapes and colors and whatever the fuck other surely fantastic but also entirely irrelevant ways in which you might be different from myself. We, together, united as one, as people who genuinely care about truth with a capital T, and what can only be described as an extremely problematic and in so many ways incredibly bizarre political cult. The politicians, billionaires, and the opportunists orbiting them think that we'll be too distracted by the word they're waving around with one hand like a lightsaber to notice what the other hand is doing, dividing us from each other and draining that word of meaning and
That's what I've written thus far for a transition.
So one of the things within the video where he was talking about this isn't a right versus left thing, that this is a human thing, and that's ultimately like sort of the issue that it's getting at that doesn't seem to be quite getting into the head with the questions that I have surrounding the Renee Good situation, is that this isn't a right or left thing. This will become a U.S. citizen thing, one thing that I've talked about in the videos that just won't be engaged with. That's why I'm asking the question, do you want law enforcement officers, regardless of agency, to police you the same way as Renee Good? Because it's not about right or left, it's about, do you want that to happen to you? And that just isn't being engaged with at all. It's being thrown out of the window. So now after this, let's go into the... let's talk about the ICE and DHS and how they feel. All right, so this is part 4. And we're going to talk about the article that talks with ICE and DHS. So hopefully by now, let's just sort of recap real quick. So we've gone over C.R. Williams and Lothier Mordred's sort of talking points. We didn't really go over Lothier so much. He had more of a nuanced position at first, but then decided to backtrack when he saw C.R. Williams. And I hope I made it clear with the point of talking about Veritas's video that what C.R. Williams was doing was very much the pointing at the other side and saying, well, it's not okay when your side does it, but it's okay when my side does it. And the problem in doing that is that it really shouldn't be okay when either side does it. And that a lot of the representation of the left that C.R. Williams and many MAGAs really do with the left is a straw man version of what the left's position and arguments actually are. And you end up with this thing where you have, in essence, MAGAs saying, well, when your side does X, it's bad. And then when their side does X, they don't think that it's X at all. They think it's something else and it's completely justified. When in reality, if their side is doing X and it's not okay when the other side does X, then that means that it shouldn't be okay when their side does X, because when their side does X, their side will do X to them. That this shouldn't be done to just leftists. This shouldn't be done to right-wing people, to MAGAs. It shouldn't be done to anyone. Police should not operate with impunity, regardless of your political position. That is the main crux of why I keep bringing up things like adjudication, why I keep bringing up the question about should law enforcement act with impunity? Is that a legal precedent that we want to set? Well, then he says, well, your side already did that. Well, I don't think that my side has. And if it has, then I disagree with that, because my side, the left, does not want militarized people running around the cities and harassing people, whether they're illegal immigrants or not. Like, this is unacceptable on so many levels. So, no, my side hasn't done X. My side doesn't advocate for X. My side is vehemently against X. And the thing is that I keep trying to point out is if we allow law to act with impunity, it's only okay when MAGA's side does it, because right now it's targeting people they don't like, the left. And they think they're justified because they think the left has done that. The left has not done anything like what we're seeing. Not anywhere close. Nowhere close. And real leftists, not neoliberal, but real leftists do not advocate for this in any way, shape, or form at all. Like, this is not something the left wants to do in any imaginable or conceivable thing. Like, the left right now, it has the position that ICE and DHS should be completely defunded and stripped, because it's gone too far. It's violating basic human rights, liberties, and freedoms. And that's what the left wants to do. The left wants those funds to be used for things like disability, food stamps, Medicare for, medical care for everybody, universal health care, subsidized housing, and things like that. So, no, the left has not done this. There is no example of the left doing this. And the left does not tend to be tribalistic. It's not, we don't, most leftists do not base their positions, their values, their principles on hierarchy. They're based more off of egalitarianism. So even if somebody who's supposedly in public office representing the left engages in bad policy or does things that do not align with those values, the left generally is not encompassed by celebrityism or fandom, and is more quickly will more quickly dismiss such a thing and ostracize that leader from the left and say, you don't represent us because you did this thing. So, no, the left has not done anything remotely close to this. The left does not advocate for things like this at all. It's not a leftist position to want militarized secret police forces wandering around through cities, hassling civilians. That's not a leftist position. That's not a value or principle of most people on the left. There might be some communists you might find, like some Stalinists or something, that might advocate for such a thing. But that's really like a very, 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 very teeny tiny, itty bitty, teensy weensy amount of people. The broad majority of the left wants to see law enforcement sort of re-envisioned, move away from like this sort of penalty system and move towards a system of rehabilitation and public health and safety rather than that of retribution and revenge. The left does not usually typically carry the mindset, principles, values, and I'm speaking for myself, and there's many that agree with me, that the legal system should move in that direction, like I said, of rehabilitation and public health and safety, not retribution and revenge, not might makes right. That's not a value or principle of the left, generally speaking, just generally speaking. So to really reiterate, the point of that was to say, like, hey, you're advocating something that's going to turn around and bite you in the butt. And that's what I'm saying, is that I don't care if you burn a pride flag. I don't care if somebody burns an American flag for symbology. Obviously, like, if somebody steals someone's flag and burns it, that is destruction of property. That has nothing to do with free speech. You don't have the right to destroy people's stuff. That's a different topic. And it gets conflated as the same thing because straw man, you know. So that to me is what I see, you know, MAGAs, not just C.R. Williams, but many, many MAGAs doing, is they're defending something that's like, if this becomes the precedented norm of law enforcement, I don't think you want to live in that society, because eventually it is inevitable. It will become the way that law enforcement works for you too. This isn't about how the left is policed. This is about American citizens and how they are policed in totality. Not just the left, but the right as well. And I think that that's something that we should be discussing. And we should stop doing this whole but your side shit, because it's like, it doesn't matter what political position you're in. If you advocate for this, it's like you have squirrels in your brain. I don't know I don't know why anyone would want to live in a police, like a militarized police surveillance state. I don't know why you would want that. I'm not advocating for that. And for some reason, the right is advocating for it when it's impacting the left, saying that, well, you deserve it because you did it first. I don't think we did do it first. The left has not advocated for anything remotely close to this at all. First of all, so that's a straw man. But secondly, like this is problematic because it's not just about the left, it's about everybody. Regardless of your regardless if you're on the left or the right, why would you want to live in a militarized police surveillance state where law enforcement officers can act with impunity? As like right now that it's affecting the left, what happens when it finally impacts MAGAs? When this starts happening to you? And that seems to be a topic that C.R. Williams, Lothier Mordred, and many MAGAs that I've spoke with on the internet do not want to engage with. They don't want to even consider that as a possibility that we as American citizens should stop talking about, oh, you're on the left, you're the enemy, or you're on the right, you're the enemy, and say, hold up, we're all American citizens. Is this how we want to be policed? And my answer is no, absolutely not. I think law enforcement in general needs to be revised. I think it's been too militarized to begin with. Personally, I'm not saying get rid of it entirely. I'm saying we need a different approach. So, then this brings us to what ICE and DHS actually are saying about Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And this is a really interesting article. Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk, he covered this, and I will have the link to Kyle Kalinski's video on this in the description, so you can go and watch that if you want. I'm not going to play any clips from it, but I will have the link in the description. I have the article so I can read it to you myself. But when they're asked what they think about this, they tend to have a more nuanced perspective that isn't boiled down to this sort of left-right dichotomy, but they are looking at it like I'm talking about as a broad whole of how this impacts everyone. Everyone from left, moderate, center, liberal, neoliberal, libertarian, conservative, and so on. And I think that's the right thing to do. And they are actually saying, well, you're gonna find out. So here's the article here. We're gonna read this. This was done by independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, and he went and interviewed ICE agents and DHS. It's called ICE on Loads. Immigration officers speak out. Quote, "Fuck this," end quote. And the article was January 26, 2026. So he's going around interviewing them, and this is what he. So this is a quote. The best they can do is shoot the guy in the back. That's not the voice of some liberal commentator. That's what Homeland Security officer told me this weekend. One of over half a dozen who have reached out to express their alarm over the killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis and beyond. I've listened to the stories and beefs of immigration officers in Minneapolis across the country, and to a person, they all blame the shooter, one of their own. The major media is stuck on framing the killing of Alex Preddy as some national and partisan battle, highlighting Republicans breaking ranks, the NRA protesting, MAGA wavering, and Chuck Schumer doing whatever he's doing, but no one is really capturing what the federal law enforcement officers on the ground are thinking. And I think this is really important, and I think more investigative journalists should be doing this. They should be going and asking ICE agents and DHS agents, what do you think of all this? That's a very interesting thing to do. That's a very interesting approach. The truth is that they're fed up and have been for weeks. And now after this article has been posted, we're finding out they're actually getting angry because they're not getting the pay and bonuses that they were promised. And they're getting kind of burnout from it. So that's more recent news since this article has been published. The truth is that they are fed up, and they have been for weeks. They paint a picture that is more Police Academy or even Reno 911 than a Gestapo on the march. Yes, they agree that Washington is a huge problem and are uncomfortable with the mission creep that is taking them away from actual immigration enforcement. But internally, theirs is also a story of gung-ho 19-year-olds, drunken stakeouts, and senior officers disappearing into meetings and all of a sudden needing time off. They are also frustrated with the narrative unfolding and the information war being waged from Washington, including the flamboyant defense of the shooting and other controversial moves on the ground. They are basically saying here, the ICE agents, the DHS agents are flat out saying, Washington is lying to you. They're in this. They're in the thicket of this. They see these things happening, and then they see J.D. Vance and Trump and Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi coming out and going, oh, violent radical leftists and like terrorists and blah, 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 blah. And they're saying that's not what we're seeing on the ground. And actually what Trump is doing by putting them in Minneapolis is keeping them from doing their actual job, which is to find illegal immigrants and get them deported or detained. They're not able to do that because they're all the way in Minneapolis. As much as I support this administration, there needs to be more common sense in situations like this, not a knee-jerk damage control narrative that does not line up with the evidence on video. One Border Patrol agent said in a private chat group that was shared with me, this individual was not 8 to 9 times while unarmed. We can't always support what happens just because it's one of us, he adds. This is from an actual Border Patrol agent. He's agreeing with what I'm saying. He's in the... Yeah. An ICE agent was even more critical. Yet another justified fatal shooting, 10 versus 1, and somehow they couldn't find a way to subdue the guy or use a less than lethal, the agent said. They all carry belts and vests with 9,000 pieces of equipment on them, and the best they can do is shoot the guy in the back. Overall, as someone who has been covering this for months, I am struck by how angry Homeland Security officers are with their own agencies and their blunt dismissal of the Washington leadership. All of the immigration officers I interviewed for this story spoke on the condition of anonymity. Sagging morale and declining standards are a constant theme I picked up. Problems that these sources say have been festering long before the deaths of Preddy and Renee Good, and ones that very much contributed to these outcomes. There are a lot more people who have been shot and killed than has been reported, or critically injured. More than one ICE agent in particular complained about how Washington's focus on labeling protesters as impeding federal functions and thus breaking the law, and the vilification of Antifa and others labeled as paid agitators, leftists, radicals, extremists, and terrorists is confusing the ranks while also distracting everyone from the immigration enforcement mission. I can go on and on, but overall, it's been a ridiculous experience. One ICE agent told me. He says that many agents on the ground are just going along with the expanded mission because they are more interested in their away from home per diem pay and collecting overtime than whatever the mission is. Well, now they're finding out they're not getting that overtime pay and much more. So this all ICE and DHS has to do is stop doing it. Just don't. Just don't do it. Refuse to do this. Others express cynicism typical of everyone who toils at the bottom of any bureaucratic food chain, poo-pooing rapid expansion of the ICE army and shaking their heads over the ridiculous budget increases being fought for in Washington that will have no impact where they work. The brand new agents are idiots. An experienced ICE agent assigned to Homeland Security investigations told me. This same sentiment was echoed by virtually everyone I talked to, with several conveying the view that Preddy's death was the fault of some skittish young recruit who panicked when he heard the word gun, if that's what happened. Even one of the new ICE recruits agreed with the experienced agent's low assessment of the Trump freshman class. A lot of the guys, he said, referring to the new ICE recruits he worked alongside, are honestly pretty sketchy. The new ICE officer continued, I thought federal agents were supposed to be clean cut, but some of them pass around a flask as we are watching a suspect observing as well that the new guys have some weird tattoos. Those tattoos, I'm told, are symbolic of the fact that the new recruits tend to be more ideologically motivated than those of the past. And that ideological motivation is not a secret. It shouldn't be. We should know what's being meant here is that this is ideologically a pro-fascist, white nationalism, Christian white nationalist sort of movement. And that's why they're doing it and probably talking about Nazi tattoos. So this is what I mean is that the people who are generating hyperbolic stuff, the people who are generating straw man's versions of the left are the reason they're doing that. They're ideologically motivated. They probably truly believe that and don't realize that it's none of it's real. It's all fabricated. This problem is compounded by the fact raised by several officers that ICE is relying on volunteers to go to Minneapolis and other Democratic cities on these temporary deployments. This tends to favor new recruits and those who are chasing overtime pay. It is unclear how these task forces are organized in cities like Minneapolis, or indeed who is in charge and in control. But those who I interviewed agree that the tide is turning, that some agencies like the FBI are increasingly no-shows in the field, and others are expressing a reluctance to participate in non-immigration missions, meaning a lot of these ICE and DHS agents, and the FBI apparently is already doing this. If it has to do with non-immigration missions, like attacking Democrat cities because of Democrats or leftists or whatever, they want nothing to do with it anymore. They're not going to do it because they're realizing what is being said about the left, about the Democrats, isn't true. It's not real. You're being lied to. Last I heard, says one ICE officer, FBI didn't want to help us out much anymore, especially in Minneapolis, due to the bad press. Another branch of ICE enforcement and removal operations, ERO, is being squeezed heavily to serve on the streets against protesters, the officer says, adding that lots of guys are totally exhausted out there with a lot of pressure on them to conduct non-immigration missions. So your ICE and DHS are admitting right here that this isn't about immigration. It's about Trump being able to attack his political opposition, which is fascism. Despite the bravado of an uncompromising operation and the absolute support Washington expresses for the shooters, there are signs that the Trump administration is growing worried about the public and bipartisan backlash. President Trump today posted an unusually conciliatory statement on Truth Social. Governor Tim Walz called me with the request to work together with respect to Minnesota. The Post reads, "It was a really good call, and we actually seemed to be on a similar wavelength." That's a very different tone than the one adopted by his Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller, who asserted shortly after Preddy's death that the intensive care nurse, who actually was a federal government employee, was a domestic terrorist. Did you know that about Alex Preddy? He was a federal government employee. He worked for the VA. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt asked today if Trump agrees with Miller replied, "I have not heard the president characterize Mr. Preddy in that way." And tonight news broke that Border Patrol Commander At-Large Greg Bovino has been demoted from his role and reportedly plans to retire. There are signs that Congress has also finally decided to get off its ass, perhaps to do something that captures the on-the-ground sentiment and works towards de-escalation. There's a good news, bad news consequence of new reluctance on the ground in Minneapolis, one officer told me. The good news is that leadership is disappearing into urgent legal meetings, increasingly worried about the possibility that they will oversee similar killings, but also absent on the streets as leaders who might encourage de-escalation and discourage the gung-ho and the overzealous. Worse, though, sources say Homeland Security in Washington does its stupid thing of trying to divert criticism of their own behavior by raising the specter of prosecutors and others attacking ICE and broader patrol in revenge for the Preddy and Renee Good killings. Threat briefings now focused on retaliatory threats, and now they're scheduling more with contracted DHS attorneys tomorrow and the next day, one officer told me this weekend. I know managers got called into meetings all night. As these meetings are held, the ICE agents and others I've talked to say the government versus terrorist narrative is having tangible and negative impacts on the ground. So, if C.R. Williams, if you're watching right now, I want you to pay really, really close attention to what this just said. As the meetings are held, the ICE agents and others I've talked to, ICE agents and DHS agents, say the government versus terrorist narrative, because it is a narrative, is having a tangible and negative impact on the ground. Okay? That's from ICE and DHS agents themselves. Basically straight from the horse's mouth. Lots of people are freaking out, one ICE agent told me. Agents are getting seriously paranoid, afraid of being targeted by retaliators. Several agents described receiving briefings about retaliatory threats to ICE inspired by the Minneapolis shooting. Guys take it really seriously, like we are fighting insurgents, as if Minneapolis is Baghdad, an ICE officer said. Though all the federal agents I've spoken to this week weekend support immigration enforcement, they indeed see the Minneapolis operation as something else entirely, because it is. That's one of the positions of the left is, what are they doing there? Minneapolis has like the lowest population of immigrants for any major city. In fact, some of the bigger cities or states with the highest amount of illegal immigration are places like Texas and Florida. Though all the federal agents I've spoken to this weekend support immigration. Oh yeah, we already read that. Something else entirely. An open-ended counterinsurgency in a faraway land, and under an out-of-touch leadership in Washington more concerned with optics than immigration. This is a no-win situation for agents on the ground or immigration enforcement overall, the Border Patrol agent said in the private group chat shared with me. He closed on a plaintive note. I think it's time to pull out of Minnesota. That battle is lost. Fuck this, a senior ICE officer said about the shooting of Alex Preddy. So, I know I also said I wanted to talk about, and I don't really have a thing for it, but we do need to talk about also the independent autopsy that was done on Renee Good, which showed that the first shot by Johnathan Ross went into Renee Good's arm and was not fatal. Now, you've seen the video. You know that the second shot fired and the third shot fired. The argument of self-defense completely goes out the window, because he was definitely, when he shot the second and third shot, was definitely, and unless you have like some kind of hallucinatory vision, where you only see what you want to see because you want confirmation bias rather than truth or descriptive reality. The second and third shot, he was not in danger, and the argument of self-defense completely goes out the window. As the autopsy goes, it says the second shot went into her left breast tissue. It was not fatal. The third shot, final shot, that killed Renee Good, that went through the driver's side window, hit her right in the temple, in the head, and that's what killed her. So, and that autopsy report is available to the public. Now, I want to go on to part 5, which is where we discuss how actually the conversation about being able to hold law enforcement officers accountable is actually far more relevant than we thought, or the people who were arguing with me, the MAGAs who were arguing with me as a leftist, saying, like C.R. Williams saying that that's irrelevant. Well, it's far more relevant than you think, and we're about to cover that. So, part 5, the legal structures in holding law enforcement accountable and why we do it. So this part should be pretty quick and simple. This information I got, and they talk about several. The citations are several Supreme Court rulings that have occurred, past and present. The importance of civilians being able to hold law enforcement to account, why that's important, and what options are available to civilians to hold law enforcement accountable to any kind of negligence or wrongdoing or corruption, and what has been taken away, what is left, which is social accountability, which could explain why the ICE and DHS are wearing masks. It's because that prevents us from social accountability. And if you don't have social accountability, you don't have monetary accountability, being able to sue, or legal accountability, then they already can act with impunity. So this clip comes from a video that was done with an independent investigative journalist who's actually won some awards for his journalism, Johnny Harris, and another one named Max Fisher. And those links to two different videos will be in the description. So let's just play that real quick right here. And I really think it's self-explanatory. I don't think much more needs to be said on that front. But I will reiterate that this is why those questions I was asking are relevant, why they are important, and why we as a society should be having that discussion.
We're balancing between the rights of police on the one hand and citizens on the other. Police, for their part, have the power to use force. They can arrest you, and they can fine you. And we all basically accept this. I mean, someone has to keep order, and they need those powers to do it. They're the arm of the law, right? So what protects you from one misusing his or her powers against you? Then they can do whatever they want, right? But citizens have protections too. For one, the law applies to cops. If Officer Steve smashes your face with a billy club because he doesn't like you, you can bring assault charges, criminal liability, or you can sue him for damages in civil court. Failing that, one of the biggest checks on police abuse has always been simply calling attention to it. Like, go back to that video of a powerful deterrent. No one wants to risk losing their job or getting recognized at the grocery store for the wrong reason. But in recent years, citizens' protections against police have been gradually eroded away. Like, take the law saying it's a crime for a police officer to violate your rights. This goes back to the end of the Civil War, when Congress made police abuse a crime alongside abolishing slavery. That's how big of a deal this was. But they included a giant loophole. It's the federal government who enforces this law, which means that if it's the government who wanted that cop to violate your rights in the first place, there is no crime. More recently, the Supreme Court opened another big loophole. They said, from now on, even if a cop violates your rights, it's only illegal if other cops would consider what that cop did to be obviously excessive. This is a way cushier standard than the rest of us are judged by. It's like saying a used car salesman can only be convicted of lying if other used car salesmen would call him too dishonest.
Hi there, how you doing?
Ever since then, it's become so hard to convict a cop of breaking this law that district attorneys often won't even try. This is part of what led to the Black Lives Matter protests. Even when cops were caught on film killing someone without any apparent cause, nothing happened.
Ohio police officer Connor Grubb was acquitted of 6 charges stemming from the deadly shooting of a pregnant woman.
Which means, in that balance between cops and citizens, criminal liability isn't completely gone, but it might as well be. But that does leave civil liability, suing, which has been around since the founders. And the Supreme Court formalized this right in the 70s with a ruling that said if federal police agencies violate your rights without good reason, you can sue the individual officers. The idea being if Officer Steve smashes your car windows for fun or tases you because he doesn't like your politics, you can at least make him pay you damages, like as a deterrent. And this held for a long time, this balance. Until very recently, and you may have missed this, the Supreme Court blew it up.
A recent ruling by the Supreme Court is drawing criticism tonight as it effectively grants immunity in certain cases to federal law enforcement who violate the Constitution.
It started with a Border Patrol agent in Washington roughing up a local guy he suspected of wrongdoing. When the local guy filed a complaint, that agent got the DMV to review the guy's driver's license and the IRS to audit his taxes. So the guy sued. Rogue cop abusing his power to pursue a personal vendetta, right? Seems straightforward. But the Supreme Court took that case up and in 2022 said, actually, we changed our minds on this whole suing cops who violate your rights things, especially if those cops police the border. They even said, we basically think this right should never have existed in the first place. So they must have killed it. And what all this means is now, as a result of that ruling, if a federal law enforcement officer decides to crack your collarbone or, and this is a real thing that Border Patrol did recently, shoot your dog unprovoked, there's not a lot you can do about it except to show the world what they did. You name and shame the officer, you put pressure on his bosses, and maybe that's a kind of accountability. This is perfectly legal. In fact, the law says cops have to always identify themselves, including ICE and Border Patrol. Even during a violent civil disturbance, they have to give their name, badge number, and agency. The only exception to this rule is undercover cops, and even they have to unmask when the operation is over. This is why experts say ICE is the first agency in American history to mask like this. You might be thinking, but haven't I seen SWAT teams wearing face protection or cops in gas masks? And yeah, you probably have, but here's the difference. Those cops still identify themselves. Name, badge, agency. ICE agents, as a part of masking, also conceal their names, their badge numbers, and their agency, which, remember, is illegal. Which means if an ICE agent violates your rights, breaks your ribs, locks you up without justification, grabs your grandmother off the street because he thinks she looks foreign, what can you do? You already can't press charges. You can't sue. Your last option was to name and shame. Unless now you can't because that agent is wearing a mask.
So after seeing that video, I think the video is pretty self-evident. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up here because this video has gone on long enough. And the thing is like, I could go into even more detail. We could look at those Supreme Court cases. We could be doing that, which would make the video longer. We could also go over the actual independent autopsy that was done, which would make it even longer. And keep digging into the minutia of like the straw man representations of what the left's position generally is. Like the left is nebulous. Trying to paint the left with one broad stroke is not really very productive because there's a lot of ideas in there. There's a lot of different camps under one umbrella. And they really don't always see eye to eye. So I don't think that's helpful. But we go back to those comments that C.R. Williams was making in the comments, and you can see why it is that why I say he's not engaged honestly. He's not it's not honest, it's not in good faith. A lot of the representations are misrepresented, making baseless accusations with nothing to back them up. And even the accusations, like if he were to provide the baseless assertions, if he gave a base to them, more than likely that the base of the assertion is based on some kind of straw man representation, or just some kind of falsehood or red herring. And we can keep addressing these little minutias and whataboutisms and red herrings and false dichotomies, false dilemmas, and all that until we reach, a video that's 12 hours long. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. But the series of questions that are not being engaged with, and I say I don't know why they're not being engaged with, but I kind of do. It seems evident. Well, it seems to be like, if I were to take a guess of why they're not being engaged with, if I were to take a guess as to why they're not being engaged with, it has to do with really kind of the same thing with like what theists do with atheist debates, and that's trying to obfuscate from the reality that there isn't a good reason to think or believe. It has to do with confirmation bias. It's I'm going to reject descriptive reality in favor of this prescriptive reality, or because they want the confirmation bias to be real so badly they will ignore actual facts, data, and instead of engaging with the actual questions that are good questions to ask for society in general, and engage in these whataboutisms or obfuscations or these baseless assertions about the left or the Democrats that just is designed to shit all over them and not actually engage or interact in good faith or honestly with the idea that it is leading up and building towards a system, a society where law enforcement can act with impunity. And there's no way for citizens to hold them accountable. And those questions are, again, does noncompliance automatically rationalize lethal force? Yes, no, or adjudication. So with that being said, the links that will be in the description will be the Kyle Kalinske talking about the Ken Klippenstein article. Johnny Harris and Max Fisher, What ICE Wants, that'll be in the description. Ken Klippenstein's article will be in the description. Johnny Harris, Why the U.S. is Deporting So Many People, that'll be in the description. And the Veritas video that I used, part of it, there was one chapter and I used that. That video is very long. It's a very good video. I recommend it if you have the time to watch it. He makes wonderful points. He does it really, really well. He articulates it really well. So, that's why those questions are really important to engage with, and why it's incredibly dishonest and bad faith not to engage with those questions at all and keep dodging it and bringing up that and not being realistic and not engaging with facts and engaging with these parodies of reality that don't actually exist. And the sad part is, I think many people who are indoctrinated into the MAGA cult believe that they are facts, and they're not. So, with that, I really doubt they'll even watch the full video. I'll probably get responses after watching like 15 minutes. Don't forget, I have analytics. I can tell how much people engage with the actual content, but also hopefully, like, if you're a fellow leftist, and hopefully this helps you understand some aspects about how MAGA is arguing and engaging, and that they're not arguing, they're not engaging, they're doing what's called sophistry and rhetoric. It's a fallacious device that's meant to be just to be convincing, compelling, charismatic, to try to manipulate people into a cause that essentially becomes like, watching all of this, so many people have asked, how does a democrat society vote and allow somebody like Hitler to rise to power? And we're watching it in real time that, the people who follow the Hitler figure, they seem to be in a cult and completely brainwashed and don't really understand the horrors and problems with it until they are confronted with it in real time, to where they can no longer play this game of, what I'm seeing is not what I'm seeing, it's something else, until it gets right up in their face. And they can't deny that what they're seeing is actually what they're seeing anymore. That seems to be the case. It's like a cult. It functions very much like that of cultism, like Jonestown. They don't realize they're in a cult until they start seeing people drop dead from cyanide Kool-Aid. So I can guarantee you do not know what the left thinks. You don't know what the left's position is. The things you think the left is guilty of, they're not. And this whole idea of radical, violent, extremist, blah, 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 is almost really more projection than anything. Because the left has been pretty quiet. And of course, they're protesting ICE, they're protesting Trump, because what else can you do when you see injustices? What other options do you have available? What are you supposed to do when the system is actively oppressing people, breaking laws, violating basic human rights and dignity? What else are you supposed to do? We're not doing a march on the Capitol like January 6th people did. We're working within the framework of what we're supposed to be legally allowed to do, which is protest. And yeah, you see unlawful arrests, injustices, people's due process being taken away. And yeah, there are a lot of people that try to stand in the way of that, to stand up for what they believe and think to be right. And I would say that is the right thing to do. Taking away due process, or not obfuscating due process, is not the right thing to do. So it's almost like it's expected that all these different groups of people are supposed to just be complicit in their own oppression. It's just like, would you be a deer and just hop into the oven for me, please? Like, nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to be complicit in their own oppression. That's the stupidest thing that anyone could ever think someone to do. So, like, share, subscribe, comment if you're a fellow left. I don't think any right-winger will like this video, and unless they are one of the few right-wingers that have looked at the Trump administration and they too are like, okay, this is not what America is supposed to be, not what it stands for. Violations of the Constitution and everything. I mean, the man fucking tore down the East Wing of the White House, and that is not his house. That is the people's house. So it's pretty wild that people defend this. And like I said, it would be really interesting. Not interesting in the sense of like exciting. It'd be very depressing and kind of interesting, kind of mind-blowing and wild to see people defend like what that MAGA called in on Dean Withers to ask. This is literally what a MAGA asked Dean. What's wrong with having sex with children, with pedophilia? That's where MAGA's at right now. If you want to know what's wrong with pedophilia, I have an entire video series that bases off of psychology, criminology, and all kinds of academic sources on exactly why, and gets into the philosophical side of it, of mutual informed consent. And I worked closely with an academic from Spain on within that series. I also worked closely with a private investigator going around and looking for sexual predators, people who are predatory towards children within YouTube back in that time period, to get them off the YouTube platform. And ultimately that hashtag Wake Up YouTube, that private investigator was responsible. It's the reason why YouTube Kids exists today, was to give kids a space to interact with YouTube in a safe way that doesn't put them at risk of being exposed or exploited by child sexual predators. And now you have MAGAs that are defending it. And how do you defend that? That's wild. So yeah, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that, bell button, and with that, I'm out.